Good evening, everyone. My name is Josie Robbins. I'm 35 years old, and I'm from North Vernon, Indiana. It's a town in Jennings County. Growing up for me was actually pretty good. Even though my parents were already divorced, they divorced when I was a baby. So it was normal for me. I got the best of both worlds. I stayed with my mom, me and my sister, and we would go to our grandma's on the weekends, which was a farm where my father was with my brother. My parents shared joint custody of us. Life was good, actually. My mom worked at a bakery, Dolly Madison, for 19 and a half years. And she remarried to my stepdad, Jim, and she was with him for 10 years. I got to be a part of Future A-Bait. With the bikers, we would do poker runs. My life was actually great, all the way up until I was 12 years old. Bear with me because there's a lot to touch on for 23 years of active use. At 12 years old, things changed for me. My mom and stepdad were no longer getting along that well. The alcohol, the drug use behind closed doors, the fighting, the arguing, things that I didn't like to hear, and I would always tell my dad about it on the weekends. As time went on, and I was going into 7th grade, I was maturing for my age, and I liked to go out on the weekends. And I liked to hang out with my friends, which were friends of my parents at the time. And I started using pills on the weekends. And I got a bright idea that since we already had a buzz, then we would take them to school. So in 7th grade, I went to school, and about 6 of us in a cafeteria. I had the paraphernalia, and we had the pills. 5th period, I was in 5th period, and I heard a knock on the door, and my teacher went out to the hallway. And she came back in and said my name, and I walked out, and an officer asked me to put my hands behind my back. As he held my wrists, the other officer walked beside me. They stopped me in the hallway and asked me to place both hands up on the wall. And before you knew it, I was being read my own rights at 12 years old. I was found with paraphernalia and pills and escorted up to the office, where 5 of my other friends were already in custody. That day, my mother and my stepfather were at one of their biker friends' funeral. My Uncle Swanee, who used to ride me on the poker runs, had passed. My mother had passed out from hearing the voicemail on the answer machine at home. My stepfather had to come pick me up from the middle school from the cops. I was arrested and never allowed back on Jennings County Middle School grounds. From there, things tend to spiral out. Life at home got worse. I really didn't get lectured. I don't feel like my mother had the words to tell me or to say to me at the time. So it was more like my stepdad said a lot of things to me. They had to find some place to take me during the day while they was working. I tried to restart school so I wouldn't fall behind. That didn't last. I was out of it. But during that year and later in that year, my mother and stepfather were coming to the ends of their rope. Domestic abuse had started, and a lot had happened. So me and my mom ended up at my grandmother's house. Staying at my grandma's all Mom would hear about is how I'm not in school and how I smoke cigarettes and how I do this and how she's doing this wrong. And my grandma did not want to keep me, or my mom at the time. So my mom ended up getting a trailer in Butlerville Trailer Court. And we moved to the trailer court. My sister went with us. Everything was good. My mom was still kind of holding down a job at Dolly Madison. Before we moved there, though, she had been arrested. My mom got arrested for some domestic dispute at the bar. So pending a case, then we moved to Butlerville because she's on probation. And my grandma didn't want us at the house while this was all going on. We go to Butlerville, my sister, my mom, and me. My sister's boyfriend moves in. By the time I'm turning 13 years old, my mom had a lot of people over, a lot. I never paid no mind to none of it. Wasn't my business. I knew that my mom smoked marijuana. It wasn't a secret. My dad did too. And they just shut the door. But this time was different. I had went back there and I had knocked on the door. And I thought she said, "Come in." And she actually said, "Wait a minute." And when I opened the door, I seen two guys and my mom, and I seen a big pile of white stuff. And I freaked out. Because I had only learned what I thought I had known what it was. And my sister had to stop me and had to calm me down. But as time went on, I knew exactly what it was, but I didn't want to leave my mom. And it wasn't but a few months later that we all had a falling out at the trailer that led to my sister leaving. My mom laid hands on me when she was coming down. And my sister stood up for me. At that time, I had started rebelling even more. I had a new friend, and she lived in Camp Holland. Camp Holland would be the next years of my life. I started hanging out there on the weekends. My mom was so caught up, she wouldn't ever even notice if I was gone a week. Just a weekend. It started off as a weekend. Ended up being weeks and days at a time. Later that year, I totally ditched out of school. Truancy, didn't matter. I started partying more out there. I actually got my mom to let me take her car. I was driving all the time. From the Butlerville Trailer Court to Camp Holland, it's just a straight back road. So I'm 13 years old, and I think I've got it made. My friends all thought it was cool that I had my mom's car, but my mom was always gone. She was in Indianapolis. So, and I had a cell phone she had bought me, so she knew where I was if she wanted to know. But really, we didn't keep in contact that much. And the one time I go home, because she needed her car, I'd probably been gone a week. I had gotten my tongue pierced. I had stayed out there for a week because the drinking, the smoking, and my friend, she was hanging out with her boyfriend, so I went to hang out with other people out in this holler where we always partied door to door, where I stumbled upon the first smell I've ever smelled. And it was something different. And I sat there and we was smoking pot. And I kept asking my friend's brother, I was like, "Man, what is that smell?" And the next thing I know, a glass bowl is being passed around. All right, but I don't know how to do that. But they lit it for me. That weekend turned into 4 days. And when my mom had called and needed her car back, I'll never forget it. Because I told my girlfriend, I was like, we're just going to go tell my mom you pierced my tongue, la da 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 da. She's going to be fine with it. And I couldn't even keep quiet because I was high on methamphetamines. When I went to my mom's trailer to take her car, her girlfriend was there, Tanya. First, I walked back to the bathroom. And then there's a kitchen counter in between us, so I'm like, let's put some space between us. That's in my head what I was thinking. And I told her, I said, Mom, I got my tongue pierced. And I showed her. And if she couldn't tell from my pupils, then I don't know what to tell you. Because then I told her. And first thing out of her mouth was, my friends give it to you? I said, no. What are you talking about? I don't even know your friends. And she accused everybody that she had messed with had handed me meth. And I said, no, not at all. So from the age of 13, when they say a lot can happen in a year, you bet a lot can happen in a year. I went to stay in the holler because I felt more alive out there. Something that started off as a weekend high ended up being where I wanted to be, in a madness, and not a very healthy one. My mom still had the trailer. I never went there. And the one time that I was coming down really bad, I went there. I had taken a shower. I had no clothes there. I'd already packed my stuff and went to stay with my girlfriend in camp. And when the one time I go to my mom's house and I took a shower and I had to put her pajamas on because I didn't have nothing there. I'm coming out of the shower and she's just getting home with a guy friend and carrying groceries in. And I hear a boom, boom on the door. It's cops. She's on probation. And as I'm standing in the hallway, all I can think about is how I have a bag of weed in my pocket, a weed pipe in my pocket. But the cops went straight past me to my mother's room. Nobody paid no mind to me. My mom's cell phone was on the bar, so I had grabbed it, and I had put it in my own pocket. At that time, they put me in the back of a van, and they arrested my mother, and they let the guy go. They took me to Jennings County Villa. Never been there before, but that's where they took kids. I guess. I don't know. When I got there, one of my friends who got arrested with me at 12 years old was there. And she was kind of telling me about this place. And I said, I'm not staying here. And she's like, you're going to write down all your phone numbers? I was like, I ain't writing nothing down. I said, can I call somebody? And they was like, well, who are you going to call? I said, my dad. I said, he has rights to me. And I was right. I called my dad, and I told him where I was, and he came and got me. And he took me right back to the trailer. And when I got to the trailer, there was somebody there passed out. I don't even know who it was. Like I said, I didn't stay there. Passed out with drugs all around him. Didn't even know that my mom just got drug busted, so it was like, wow. And I stepped out and I made a phone call. I made a phone call to a nickname that was in my mom's phone. Never knew the person ever. Never even seen the person, but I knew that nickname because that nickname always was the one person she would always answer to. And I told him what was going on and that my mom was arrested. He sent people to come get me. And I was like, that's not what I wanted. I just wanted to go back to Camp Holland. That's where I wanted to go. Before you knew it, I was in Indianapolis with people I have no idea who they are. And they're holding me until my mom gets out. Because back then, a probation violation, you could do 2 weeks and get released and then wait on your big court on her new case. And when she was getting out, boy, I was glad she was getting out, because I just wanted to go back to Camp Holland. Of course, because why? Because I was already addicted. When she got out, I went back to camp. I asked my mom to sign a piece of paper so somebody else could be my guardian. And she did for a while. And I stayed out there for a little bit longer. But then my mom's court came up. Before I was turning 14, my mom had a court for her dealing case. I went to court with my mom and my grandma. And from the day that we walked out of that courtroom, my mom had 44 days to put her life in order and then turn herself in for 12-6. And when we left, I already knew my grandma wasn't going to take me. I was already an addict. My mom had put everything in a storage, and she went on a binge. And what that means is she partied it up for the 44 days. I went back to Camp Holland. During that mess, she did go to the bar a lot, and she found who would be my adopted sister, Wendy Neal. Wendy told my mom that her mom and dad would take me. And they did. Mel and Ivan, Ma and Pa, they adopted me. They took me in. And my mom took me up there. And before you knew it, I had 13 brothers and sisters. And they had me. And Ma and Pa knew that I was an addict. They already knew the 411. So there was nothing that would surprise them, because some of them, their kids were wild too. Sam was the same age as me. So we would go to school together when it was to come. But it was still summer. And I still wanted to party. So I would still go out to Camp Holland on the weekends while everything was getting in order. Because my adopted sister, Wendy, her trailer's in Camp Holland. But Wendy, sober, she only drinks at the bar. She has 5 kids. So I would use that for an excuse. I'm going to Wendy's. That's what I'd tell Mom and Pa. And then I'd be out the back door at the shack getting high. And when it was becoming time for school to enroll me in school, well, before that, I'd seen my mom 3 times before she had to actually turn herself in at Jennings County Jail. Once she came up to Westport because I was hanging out with new friends, and they were older, and none of them would smoke with me because they didn't believe me that my mom knew I was an addict, or that my mom knew that I used. I said, give me your phone. And I called my mom, and she was still in a mess, my mom was, because this was before she had to turn herself in. And I called her, and I asked her to come there. And she came to Westport, right across from the cemetery, her and one of her guy friends, and we got high. And I looked over to my new friend, Nancy, and I said, now you believe me? And then my mom left. The second time that I went to go spend time with my mom before she turned herself in, Ma and Pa were always skeptical about it. But they knew that I only had limited time with my mom before she really had to go. So they wouldn't and tell me no. But I knew they wanted to. I did know they wanted to tell me no. And I would go with my mom to this one. And we was in a basement at this other guy's house with all these other people. And all weekend long, drinking and smoking meth. And I'd go back to Ma and Pa's a mess. And they knew it. And then the last time, before I would have to start school, and before I turned 14, my mom come got me in the middle of the night. And we went to a trailer. And it was reeked of a meth lab. And that was where we sat and played dice, smoked all night, shot after shot of alcohol. And after every hit, I puked. And I was sick. And whenever Mom went to take me home that Sunday, I knew that it was going to be the last time that I would see her for a long time. So she took me home. The next month, I was enrolling in school, and Mama Mel took me to school at South Decatur High School. And we're filling out the paperwork, and I dead stopped. And she said, "What's the matter, hon?" I said, "Do you see these questions?" And she said, "Well, what is it?" I said, "This paper says, have you ever been arrested on school grounds?" And then the next one says, have you ever been had drugs at school? And I was like, how do I answer that? And she's like, honestly. And I was like, is this going to stop me from being in this school? And here I thought I was going to start something new, something fresh. Nobody knows me. She said, answer them honestly, Josie. So I did. And before you knew it, I got to start the school year. And me and Sam were in the same grade. And we were both enrolling in 8th grade. But it is a small town. Westport is small. And before you knew it, October came around. And one girl coming out of the cafeteria called me a drug dealer. And I said, what did you say? She said, not only you, your mom deals dope too. And that's all it took. I smashed her in her face. And I won't forget it because I didn't stop. Before you knew it, I was in the office. And here comes Mom and Pa. And they said, just give us the paperwork to pull her out. Because I have a feeling this is going to be a repeated thing here. I don't know how the girl knew. Didn't care how she knew. They just didn't just pull me out. They pulled Sam out too, their daughter. Pulled us into homeschooling. Homeschooling was okay for a second. Until I learned that if I got up every morning and I did my chores, copied my sister's homework, I could call Nancy and have her come pick me up. And we'd be hitting the liquor store. And then we'd scoop the loop, get a joint, find a buzz. And if we couldn't find a buzz, I'd have her take me to the holler. At the age of 14, that became a routine, and then I decided that I was leaving my adopted family's house, not turning back. I went to Camp Holland and I stayed. And that's where you would find me. Something that started off as a weekend high ended up being my life for 23 years. So I ended up in Camp Holland, and at first I stayed at an abandoned place. On the weekend, I met a guy, and he was cool. So I thought. He would only be there on the weekends. His name was Bill. He was my first boyfriend. He was 15 years older than me, something like that, 12 years older than me. I had lied and said I was 18 years old because I knew if somebody was to find out my age, then someone would, most of the people already knew me, but nobody, they just knew me because we all used together. So when I met Bill, and how I met Bill, is because I had a box of Sudafed that somebody else had given me. I'm a 14-year-old in the middle of a holler where I shouldn't be, introduced to a guy, and he thought that I was a minor right off the rip. And I said, yeah, right. How would I have this if I'm a minor? You have to be of age to buy this. And you did. So I had him tricked. So I thought. So I stayed out there, and I would only see Bill on the weekends because he only did his thing out there on the weekends. Later, I would, when I would come down, I would be hungry. I only had cut off shorts, a tank top, and I would be barefoot. And by the end of it all, I would be staying in a cabin that had no electric, no water, no nothing. This one couple out there, Rick and Judy, they would feed me once a week because they could tell that something was up. And one time Bill came out there and I was rough looking. He hadn't been out there in weeks. And he said, "Why don't you come with me?" And I was like, "Where are we going?" He said, "I'm going to take you to my mom's because you need a shower." And I rode out to Holton, where I would be for the next few years. Going there, he introduced me to his mother. She fed me, and I remember it was pancakes with peanut butter and syrup. And I couldn't stop eating. And I had ate so much that it hurt my stomach. I won't touch a pancake to this day at all. It scarred me. And I stayed there. And during the week, I never seen Bill. And there's reasons for that. So by the age of 15, I stayed up there in Holton. And by the age of 15, I was using more than what Bill had been using. And he told me I had to get a job. And I was like, okay, like where? And I ended up working at McDonald's. And I got my dad to sign the paperwork, and I got me a job. But during the 14 to 15, turning that age, that whole year was a mess because Bill had found out my age. And when he found out my age, he would get so high that he thought he was going to jail. Heck, I even thought I was going to go to jail because I was a mess. So I was never allowed to leave the house for the longest time because he was concerned. And finally, I had called my dad and introduced him to Bill. When I turned 15 years old and I was working at McDonald's in Versailles, one time I came home and Bill said, "We got to go." I said, "Go where?" And he's like, "Things are getting hot. We have to go. We're leaving his mom's house to go somewhere." And one time we didn't have stuff, so he went and got us stuff. And he got it from somebody I didn't know. That day we were in the hospital. At 15 years old, I was poisoned with rat poison in the meth, and I ended up in Jennings County Hospital. They wouldn't admit me without my father's permission. That was the first time that my dad actually knew that I was on drugs, meth. He never asked me, but that day it was all in black and white. I was admitted, I was delirious, I was poisoned. They separated us in rooms, and the cops were there. And I don't remember much. That was my first time being hospitalized from methamphetamines and from rat poison. When I turned 16, I got all wild hair, and I told Bill I was done. I was done because by this time we had moved to a different place, and I had a new job at Wendy's in North Vernon because things were hot again because of him doing whatever he did while I was at work. And I met somebody, one of his friends, that would come to our cabin. And he said, "If you ever want to leave here, I'm headed to Kentucky." I said, okay. And the next day I told Bill I was leaving. And so I thought, you know, because I was really hooked. And every time I leave, I get pulled right back in. So I headed to Kentucky, and that's where I would stay for the next 6 months. No meth down there, but I fell back on the pills. Only pills. So I went right back to where I had started. And as time went on, and I had a job at McDonald's in New Albany, down there by Cumberland Lake, the guy I'd left with, who I thought was a good guy, ended up not being so good after all. Because I had started making friends at work, I was on the prowl. I was looking to see if I could find speed. Couldn't find it, but I met this one lady, and she said, I want to take you to this city. I was like, okay, because she mentioned cocaine. And I was like, okay. That night when she come to get me from the trailer where I lived in Kentucky, I got in her car, and the car door swung open, and before you knew it, I was being dragged across the gravel by the head of my hair, strangled, slapped. And I had never been aggressively abused like that, ever. Bill didn't even do that to me. So in my mind, I'm thinking, why am I down here? What on earth am I doing here? Before I had called my dad or made the decision to call my dad, I had went to a clinic down there, and I had gotten checked out because a young lady like me, and I wasn't having cycles at all. I was freaking out. And I come to find out that this doctor told me, well, for one, you're very young for being here by yourself. I said, yeah, okay. And I got checked out. I had a woman's pap smear done. When I got the results, they told me that I had cancer. And they said, brace yourself because you'll never have kids. And I said, what? And they said, you'll never have kids. I called that doctor a liar. I said, I don't believe you just because that paper says that. And I said, I have faith. And I walked out, not knowing what it would be years later. And I never seen a doctor again. I had called my dad and my brother. I still had strangulation marks on my throat. And as soon as I told them, my dad and my brother came straight down there and brought me back. And I had them take me to Westport, back to where I knew I could go and be okay for a while. Before you knew it, I had Nancy take me to Camp Holland, where I would find Bill with his new girlfriend, which was okay with me, because that's really not what I wanted. I just wanted what was in his pocket. And when we got there, I had told him what I wanted and that I would be on my way. And he looked at his girlfriend and said, give it to her. And that day, I asked Nancy, I was like, let's just go to your house and party. Let's do it all. So we did. But then my addiction took a different turn. That night at Nancy's, her husband's family came over, and they're a bunch of guys. I would, for the next 8 months, be hooked on oxys, fentanyl patches, Xanaxes, and all the meth was gone because we did every bit that I had. I had met Brad Sullivan. And we stayed in Westport for a while, but his addiction was out of control. If he didn't have a pill, it would be bad, but not for me at the time. So they owned a house in Milford, Indiana, and that's where I would find myself at 16 years old. My addiction went up to a new level, and it was called white china. And that is heroin. before this fentanyl stuff. And that's when I became an IV user. And I had met my new best friend, and it was a dog named Raven. Big pit bull. I was so low in my addiction with Brad that we would boost to get our high. We were boosting T-bone steaks, ribeyes, New York strips to sell them to a drug dealer to get our fixes. I would take some of them steaks and I'd feed them to the dog. Boy, I love that dog. On the side, I would always feed that dog. 6 months into it, right before I'm turning 17, Brad's mom and brother and sister and them were going to have a 4th of July party 24 days before I turned 17 years old. And they asked if I would come and babysit. And I said, yeah, sure will, because we were broke and had nothing to get high on. So yeah, I'll come babysit for cash. Bet. So they took us to Westport. Even though they didn't want Brad around because of his anger and stuff. That day, my life changed. And it changed for a lot. I had Mackenzie. She was 4 years old. Brad's niece. I had her 1-year-old brother, Jordan. I had Junior, who was almost 3 years old. And I had his baby brother, Dalton. They were all Brad's nieces and nephews. And I had my friend Nancy's son, Quentin. She gave me a bag of weed to babysit, so that would put our withdrawals at ease for a little bit. And that 4th of July, 24 days before I turned 17, I'll never forget it. It scarred me for life, and I still wear it to this day. Even though I made $140 babysitting that day. I seen the devil, and I seen it so calm and so smooth. Brad had the phone, couldn't get nobody to answer. And all I said was, wait until tomorrow when we don't have these kids. Who cares that we can't get a buzz right now? Go smoke. And in the calmest, coolest, he turned around. And Brad's 25 and I'm 16. And he's 200 pounds built. And he punched me right in this eye. And it set me back, and it just stunned me. It kind of shocked me. I was like, okay, did not scream. Didn't want to scream. I had a lot of babies around me. Didn't say a word, because the first hit was just like, wow. The next hit, I heard a crack. And the third hit, I felt numb. The fourth hit, I'm still standing because I have all these kids, and all I can think about is these kids, these babies that I'm in charge of, that I'm watching. By the time the fourth time he hit me, I had brought my hand up to touch, but my face was out here, and I couldn't touch it. Mackenzie come running from the kitchen, and I remember looking at her, and all I could think of is I had to stay straight. I could not fall out. I could not be weak. The fifth hit, all I could feel was what I believed was blood. The sixth hit, Mackenzie screamed and cried. And by the time the 7th hit, I was picking my head up, listening to her scream. And he had finally stopped. I never cried, not once. Not once the whole time. And I asked Kenzie, I said, you help me get the baby's bottles? And it's 7 p.m. at night. She said, yeah. I said, good. Let's get the kids' bottles. I grabbed all the kids and we went into a bedroom and I locked the door. And I told Mackenzie, I said, pick a cartoon out and do not unlock the door. I passed out with the kids with the bottles. I was woken up at 1 p.m. the next day by Brad's sister and mom pounding on the bedroom door. And I woke up, babies were asleep, Mackenzie's passed out on the floor, cartoon's still going. But as I woke up, a pillow was stuck to my face. And I went to try and pull, and I screamed, and I couldn't get it off. When I opened the bedroom door, Crystal seen me, and she said, oh my God, did he do that to you? And I didn't answer her. I went to the bathroom, and she ran warm water down to help to get the pillow unstuck off of my face. When it fell off and you could finally peel it off, I didn't recognize myself in the mirror. I didn't want to look in a mirror because every bit of this was dislocated and shattered and nothing but blood. And I couldn't let her touch it to clean it up. And they was freaking out, but I was still calm from the storm, still calm. We had to take Mackenzie and Jordan home and Quentin home before we went back to Milford, knowing I have a pocket full of money. Brad was already on one. We take Quentin home, and Nancy and Buddy looked at me and they said, and I tried to hide it with sunglasses, but I cried putting them on. It was not to be hidden. And they apologized 1,000 times to me for ever introducing me to him because it was Buddy's cousin. And I said, it's not your fault. I used to think it was my fault. I used to think I deserved it, that it was part of my madness. But what he took from me was something that I still am scarred from to this day. Confidence. And being able to look in a mirror and see beautiful instead of what I see. I would never know that it robbed me of that until later in my life. When we took the kids home to his brother asked me to step inside, and I did. And his brother rolled him in the driveway. But I had a feeling that wasn't going to be the end, and it wasn't. When we got to Milford, to our house, Raven, the dog. I love that dog. Brad wanted money, and I said no. I wasn't about to do it. And stuff went flying. And as I was going to walk around that corner, a mason jar was getting ready to be smoked upside my head. And in the blink of an eye, that dog that he bottle fed latched his arm. Saved my life. I knew he saved my life. And he turned on his own owner. And that dog became my best friend and my hero. Brad took off and stormed up the road after beating him for saving me and turning on him. And while he was gone, I made the phone call to my sister and my aunt. When I called them, they came. And when they came, so did a 357 Magnum. My aunt and my sister came to get me from Milford, and I'll never forget it. They said, point out the house where he's at. So I did. And it started with shredding donuts in the yard to my aunt with a 357 Magnum in their face, threatening their life. That day I left and I never went back. I went to the farm with my aunt and my sister in North Vernon, where I would stay for the next 6 months because I wouldn't go out in public because of my face. It took that long to get the drainage out of my eye and for the swelling to go away. And for the longest time, I thought I would be able to see again because I seen bright beaming light out of my eye. But that light went away too. At 17 years old, when I turned 17, I never thought about a relationship again for a long time. Never did it cross my mind. Instead, all I thought about was getting high. My next level and how I could get my next high. I called Bill again, got back on, only in a different level this time. Next, I would become, from the age of 17 until I was 20, was full-blown madness. I would start using. I would definitely hustle, and I hustled to survive every bit. Not only was I using, I was driving. I didn't care where I had to drive. I was going. I wouldn't slow down, not for nothing. When my mom finally got paroled, and she came home to a full-blown addict. I was known for cooking meth. I was known for shooting meth. And I was known for a lot of things not allowed at my grandma's while my mom was on parole. My grandma would not have it, and I couldn't blame her. For a long time, you couldn't get me to sit down. Couldn't even get me to talk to you long enough. All I knew is how to hustle. I didn't care about money. It's not what I was in it for. It was always the next thing that would make my adrenaline rush. I was always looking for the next high. By the time I was 18, my mom started IV using with me. And that was a mess itself. We would fight. We would box. I would fight her. She would cry. Things would fly. If I couldn't get it, it was so wrong, everything and how I would treat my mom. I would pay people to do it to me because I never ever wanted to learn it myself because I loved it too much. And I knew if I ever had control of that needle, that would be the end of me. I did. I knew that from the gate. At 18 years old, one day I went to somebody's house to get that fix. And like I said, I would pay people to do it for me. I was in North Vernon, and I was with friends that I thought I knew. Turns out, I was set up. I was bleached through my veins. I was set on fire. I fell down a flight of stairs, and someone picked me up and threw me in a shower, and I screamed, and all I could do is scream. I was set up to be robbed. Not only that, I didn't know what was to come of this. I had never felt any pain like that in my life. Time went on. I got better. The people that robbed me got their karma, I guess you would say. When I turned 19, my mom was involved with a Hells Angels. And she's on parole still. He's on federal house arrest. And I'm still high and a mess, backpacking everywhere I go. And I didn't really like being there because you said feds around me. I wasn't going to be around, I'm telling you. But I'd still go visit her, and I'd let her know. One day I'm at this roundhouse in Westport. I'd probably been up for a month. Seemed like it. And I would pay people to drive me so I could gather stuff, so I could get stuff, so I could get my next high. And my friend, he was with me, and I'll never forget it. He woke me up because I had fallen out at this person's house. And he said, "Josie." And I was like, "What?" And he's like, "Listen to this." Turned on the news, and it was my mom and Larry busted. And I fell back out. And that was in the early morning. A couple hours later, he woke me up again. And when he woke me up, I was like, "Where's my book bag?" And he's like, "Right beside you. I swear I didn't let nobody come near you while you was sleeping." And I said, "Man, I had the weirdest dream about my mom." And he's like, "That wasn't a dream." I was like, "What?" He's like, "Your mom and Larry got busted. Feds, cops." I was like, "Wow." He's like, "Do you not want to make this trip today?" I said, "No, I'm not taking a day off. Why would I take a day off?" And he's like, "Let's go get breakfast before we even take off. Let's go get breakfast." And at this house, it's called the Roundhouse in Westport. It was a known drug house. A lot of people. I'm 19, and I agreed to go to breakfast. And I'm kind of still in shock trying to picture my mom being busted by the feds. But yet, I hadn't used yet from just waking up. So I'm like, okay, we'll go get breakfast. I'm in somebody's car I don't even know, some girl. Nancy's with me, my friend that was always around, because it's the Roundhouse is in Westport. We go to McDonald's. When we come back to get into the other vehicle, me and Nancy are arguing. And I remember saying something before I reached for the orange juice to take a drink. I said, "I'm in pain." And they said, "What?" And we had just pulled in the Roundhouse driveway. I said, "Something hurts." And it's in the winter. I won't forget it. And I stepped out of that car and I collapsed in a driveway. When I came to, I was being shocked in my chest by the paramedics. Had no idea what was going on. I was in a hospital. This is the second time that I would be in a hospital due to meth. Only this time I hadn't used that day, so I really didn't think it was because of that. And this girl was crying in this room. And I'm like, "Who are you?" And she said, "My name's Nikki. You collapsed outside my car, and I seen 20 people run around to leave you for dead. And I drug you into my car, and I called the paramedics." She didn't know me, and I didn't know her. But this girl is in hysterics, crying. And the doctor came in and said, I don't know what kind of life you live, but I can tell you one thing. If you don't stop what you're doing, you're going to be dead. And I was like, okay, whatever you say. That doctor handed me a script of Xanax. I was like, wow, that's the first. When I was getting released, this girl stuck by me, didn't know her at all, and she's still crying. And I'm like, I'm fine. And I was like, what's your name again? And she said, Nikki. And I was like, how did I meet you? And she's like, I drove you to McDonald's. And I was like, okay. And I was like, where's my book bag? And she's like, your friend has it. I said, take me there. And she's like, if I take you to get this book bag, will you come to my house and stay with me and my husband tonight? Why would I do that? She said, because you need to rest. I heard that doctor. And I was like, okay. Take me to get my book bag and I'll come to your house. When we got to her house, she was still crying, still telling her husband everything, how she didn't know me. She saved my life. And she didn't know what to think about this. And I didn't either. I didn't know what to think either. I gave the script as annexes away because I didn't want it. I don't even know who I gave it to. I let them have that paper to go fill. It was a mess because from 2006 to 2011, you couldn't stop me. You couldn't slow me down. I was in full throttle. In 2012, my mom was out again on parole, and she was in Madison. Things had slowed down a lot because people had went to jail. So I had to maneuver and route my way to new hookups, new ways, new people. And I was 12 counties. Had people in every different county you could think of. When my mom got out on parole this time, she lived in Madison, Indiana. She was on work release, and she came home. She had her own apartment. And then, at that time, I was still in possession of using, helping people cook, whatever was needed to be done. My mom called me in the middle of the night. And when I showed up down there in Madison, blood was everywhere. Her name was wrote on the wall. And all I could think of is, I can't take my mom with me. I'm in active addiction and she's sober. But I wasn't going to leave her there. So I got my mom in the vehicle, told my cousin. But before I left, this guy was in my face, the guy that she was seeing. Called me a dope cook, called me every name in the book, and I'm right across from a school. And my cousin got me out of there and got my mom out of there. I called everybody at my house where I was going back to and told them I was bringing my mom on parole, clean out the house. So we did. And that's where we stayed for a while until we was popped. And then meth lab was busted. But I wasn't busted there. I had pulled in that driveway and led them all on a high-speed chase in my brother's four-wheel drive to try and save everybody else. I've been arrested 15 times. I'm a 9-time convicted felon. The rest are misdemeanors. And if you would ask me if I ever thought about sobriety, no, you bet I didn't. And out of all them times that I've been arrested, I have watched people been baptized. And I always stood on the sideline. And people would ask me why I wasn't getting in that water. And I said, because I've always learned, or what I do know, is that's serious. And I know when you do that, you're committing yourself, and that's all I know. So I would always watch it for years. In 2013, in 2012, after I was arrested and I was released, I met my kids' dad because he had my mom's truck while we were in jail. I was sober, months sober. I wasn't with nobody, but that's when I conceived my daughter, Isabel. And I was like, And that little bit of faith that I had, I would always, that doctor was a lie. That little faith was as tiny as a mustard seed. And it grew. And I've always believed in God. I just wasn't ready yet. And I knew He was there, working in every background of everything, or else I wouldn't be here today. Our addiction from 2013 didn't just stop, though. It stopped long enough to have the kid. But I was on house arrest at my kids' grandparents. Me and their dad wasn't even in a relationship. That's how different this was. I went to Westport with my mom when she got out from this time. And because someone signed a confession letter and he stood up and took all the charges, so my mom got to come home. We ended up in Westport while I was pregnant. And whenever we went to tell Isabel's dad and David's dad that he was going to be a dad, he went running out the back door. That's real. We wasn't in a relationship. It wasn't nothing like that. And I was like, okay, well, there's that, Mom. My mom drove me out of there. And I didn't see him again for months while I was pregnant with my daughter. I lived at my mom's and her boyfriend's in Westport. And his parents were married 58 years. And they told him that you're going to be with this girl because you got her pregnant. And they pushed us together. And we tried it, you know. While I was pregnant, Bill showed up. He showed up out there at my mom and Billy's in Westport. It had been a long time. A long, long time. And I told him, I said, I'm 6 months pregnant. I don't know what you're thinking. And this ain't happening. And even though I was pregnant, there was still madness around. My family was still doing the most. My mom, my brother, my sister, and me. We all ended up in the madness together for a very long time. For the most of the time of my 23 years, it was me and my mom. My brother didn't pick up a drug until he was about 24 years old. And when he did, he went full throttle. But I've never seen a family like ours, ever. I've seen my mom strive to do everything she could to raise us, being a single mother for the most part of our lives. I'll never forget the next time I ended up in the hospital. I ended up having my son in 2015. David's parents and family, they gave us an apartment. We tried to make it work. It wasn't working. I made a mess of this situation this time. And from there, David and my kids, I placed my kids with their grandparents. I signed guardianship to their grandparents in 2015 or 16 and got the CPS out of my life. And they were in my life over marijuana. And then I failed a drug test for meth. So I signed guardianship to my kids' grandparents. And you would think that this would be the end of it all, but it wasn't. I was not yet done. We moved to a different town. called Holton, back to one of my roots where I had been. Me and my mom, and who I was dating at the time. And in 2018, I would be hospitalized again. Only this time for IV using, and the fever almost caused me brain damage. I went to one hospital with my boyfriend in North Vernon, and they looked at me like I was a drug addict because of the time from when I was 15 is still on my file. And as soon as they broke my fever, it was 104.3 or something like that. As soon as they broke my fever, I ripped the IV out. And I told him, I said, take me home. So we left. We go back to Holton. My mom's passed out, so she didn't even know I was at the hospital. When we got back to Holton, I told him, I said, I feel good. Let me get high. That last shot would put me into almost in a coma. That night, I ran a fever of 106.4 or 5. Everybody, all the other adults, my mom, my boyfriend, my sister, her boyfriend, were all in the other room. Nobody was checking on me. I laid in that bed, and all I could remember was my eyes rolling, and my body was setting septic, and my legs were swelled 3 times the size. It took everything I had, sweat pouring, me delirious, and I grabbed everything along the way to get myself to that living room where they were all sitting getting high, and nobody could hear me in the other room. When I got to that living room, I yelled, and I was holding myself up on a mantle with my eyes rolling. And I yelled at my mom for being a drug dealer and not paying no attention to me. And even though that I was a grown adult, all they cared about was the meth, and I wasn't okay. On my legs, I yelled at everybody. And I told them I was sick, and I was sick and tired of the meth, and I was sick and tired of them. And I flipped out. And before you knew it, they had to call an ambulance to take me out. And this was in 2018. My kids lived with their dad and their grandparents at this time. And I was taken to Greensburg Hospital, where they strapped me down. My fever got up to 106.9. They looked at them and told them, you know, she could be brain dead from this if this would have kept continuing. This time they really strapped me down. I'm not allowed to go nowhere. I felt like I was in a straitjacket. Before you knew it, they was taking a needle this long into my wrist, straight into my bone. And I'll not forget that. It hurt. And I screamed and I yelled. I was fighting for my life. And I stayed in that hospital with ice packs on me. My mom and my boyfriend doing whatever. My mom waiting. They had never seen somebody's white blood cell counts be that high fighting an infection. A couple days later, I was supposed to go back to the hospital for an appointment, but I never did because I wouldn't make it back. A couple days later, I had my kids. They were in diapers. And it was my weekend to have them. And even though I still had hospital bracelets on, my mom and my sister would help me with the kids when I had them. I'll not forget that day because I got up and I went to look out the front door and I moved the curtain and I said, "Cops are here. Everybody get ready." And that's sure what we did. everybody got ready. I grabbed my kids and I called their grandma and told her what was going on before the cops even came in the house. And they was there in like 10 minutes. And I'm handing my kids over to their grandparents in my front yard with their dad. We was all arrested. There was 9 of us. We was called the Notorious 9. At that time, this is the first time ever my sisters ever went to jail with us. It's always been me and my mom and my brother. I was in a new county, in a new jail that I've never been to jail in. Always in Jennings. And when I go to jail in Jennings County, they all know me. And they know how to treat me. And they also treat you like you're a human. In this town, I didn't know what was going to happen. And that's when my mom was sentenced 11 years on habitual with an enhancement. And everybody else signed a plea to go home, and I was charged with child neglect. But before I took that charge on a rec yard, because they housed us separate, me and my mom and my sister, I asked my mom if she wanted me to take it. Let me take this one so you can go home to my kids. And she said no. Because if you read the paperwork, it sounded like I was the guilty one. And that's how we were in my family. Me, my mom, and my brother for years. For the longest time, it's like, who's taking this one? And sometimes it was like we didn't have a choice because we would do silly stuff on our own. So I would end up. And I got housed in a different jail when they took my mom on trial. So I didn't get to say goodbye, and I didn't get to see her. From that day, when I got released, you would have thought it would have been the end of it all. But I still had pending cases out of Jennings County. Yeah. So my mom went to prison. My sister got out. Everybody in our case got out. I had to go do time somewhere else until my mom got sent up and they took me back to be released. But I still had pending cases, so I knew something was still around the corner. But I got out for a little bit. And I was back on again. And when I finally got to talk to my mom, I never would lie to her. If she called me from prison and asked me how I'm doing, I would tell her I'm doing good. And if I wasn't, I would straight up be honest with my mom, because I don't need her sitting in a prison cell wondering if I'm going to answer that phone call. I'd be like, no, Mom, the cops are after me again. Or no, Mom, I've fallen off. This last time, in 2021, so in 2019, I ended up in prison. And then 3 cases out of Jennings County. And by that time, I was over it. I was over it. And as soon as they said prison, I said yes. You know why? Because my mom was in prison. I was over being on the streets. I was over the same repeated cycle. And sometimes that's just how it is. I wanted to see my mom. So when they said that I could fight the 3rd case and I didn't have to take it because somebody else admitted that it was theirs, I said no. Because that 3rd case was going to send me to prison. And they said, are you sure that this is what you want to do? And I said, absolutely. And they made me read that person's confession. And they said, do you understand what you're owning up to today? And I said, yes, sir. And I signed 4 to 2 years. My mom was already sitting in prison. And I had already done my research that I would get 1 contact visit with her before they would get me through the system. And that's all I wanted. Because I didn't get to see her. I didn't get to hug her when she went on a trial and got sentenced to her habitual. My brother and sister got to say goodbye. And I didn't. I got a letter that she wrote and left with somebody at the jail saying that this isn't goodbye. I will see you again. And when I see you 3 kids, I expect you to be doing something different with yourselves. This is not the life that I wanted you to have. And she just promised that it wasn't the end, you know. So when they told me I could go to prison, I said, yeah. And I signed that plea. Knowing my kids are at a good home. My kids were with their dad always, all their life. And still to this day. And they lived with their grandparents. In a home that was never split apart. Their grandparents were married 58 years. So they're blessed. I'm blessed because of their family and because of God. But I never, ever wanted my kids to grow up like I had to. So that was a hard choice. And it became harder later down the road. I go to prison. I get my contact visit with my mother. And she told me what I was going to do so that I could go home. She said, you are not supposed to be here. This is not where I'm supposed to be seeing you. She's acting like a mom now. And she said, you're going to enroll in school and you're going to go into a recovery program. So she told me, she said, up here in prison, you can get your GED. It'll give you a 6-month time cut. That's what you're going to do. My mom's telling me what I'm going to do. I'm like, okay. That's what I'm going to do, Mom. And she's like, and you're going to be in RWI, recovery while incarcerated, and you're going to get another time cut, and you're going to get home to them babies. That's what you're going to do. I was like, okay. I got to see her for that one contact visit, and then I got processed and sent to a different prison, a lower facility in Madison, Indiana. And she was right. I'd graduate, and I would work the recovery program. But was I completely recovered? Not at all. My kids and their dad and their grandparents picked me up at the prison gate. Out of 2 years, I did a year. I was out in 2019. And I tried hard not to do anything. I got me a job. And they allowed me to parole to their house. And for a minute, I was good again. But in 2021, I spiraled out, met somebody, got arrested. And it didn't just stop there. I ended up out on 48 hours. That's what they do in Jennings, with a court date. And during that next 72 hours after being released from jail, I was already back in my madness. And I was pulled over up here in Scottsburg. And when I got pulled over in Scottsburg with one of my friends, I didn't know what the outcome was going to be. So I ate what I had on me. Didn't know that we was going to get let go with a headlight warning. Because I was in fear that I was going back to jail. And before you knew it, they ran our names. We were released with a headlight warning. And when we was pulling away, going back towards North Vernon, I started seizing. My friend's grabbing me, and he's like, what's wrong? And I told him what I did because I didn't know, and I didn't want to go back to jail. He pulled me up, and he did everything in his power to keep me awake. And I told him, in all the nodding and the falling out, where to take me and who to call. And I had some of my close friends of mine and my mom's and my brother's come get me. And that's where I would stay for the next 3 days. And when I finally come to, I'd called the person I got that from, and come to find out it was laced with fentanyl. And it took me a week to recuperate because I felt like I was slow. And I was. And that's when I realized that man, it ain't like it used to be, and something's got to give. In 2021, I was facing a case. By the time 2022 came, I'd caught 2 more cases pending. And at the end of 2022, I had 2 more cases. I had 5 total cases. Warrants started popping up every which direction. And during this time, my kids' grandparents asked me to sign fully to them. And I wasn't ready to give up. Not at all. I had never had 5 open cases pending against me, though. And I could only imagine what was going to happen whenever they finally did catch me. On the way here tonight, I asked Isabel what she could remember. And she said, "Do you remember, Mom, you put me in that truck with your friend Destiny? And the cops were behind us. I put them in a truck separate from my vehicle because I knew that something was wrong that night, and I was in a vehicle with my cousin. I put my kids in my friend's vehicle, and sure enough, something was wrong that night. The cops were waiting down the road, and I had my cousin lead them on a high-speed chase. And I thank God every day that I put my kids in a different vehicle that night. But my kids did see what had happened. And to know that that's the memories they have. My son told me here recently, "Mom, I only have a memory of you running from the law." Today, I love living in the present of I embrace every moment that I have with my kids. When I got arrested finally on all my warrants, it wasn't that night leading them on that chase. I jumped out of a vehicle at 55 miles an hour on foot, and they didn't catch me that day. It was weeks later. But before they had caught me, I had reached out to somebody who was sober, and I asked her, "What's that rehab you went to while you had warrants?" She sent me the information. So I had called, did my interview, and I was in the process of waiting for them people to get back with me. And I was still a mess, still using. And I was staying on an old lady's property, and this woman had nothing but trash on her property. So I was out there in a tent at the end of my madness. This is where I'm at, in a tent in the middle of winter, burning trash, trying to stay away from the law while I'm trying to wait on this rehab to call me back. They said 48 hours. And during this, all I could remember is I couldn't get high that day. I was waiting on the phone call. My kids' family was asking me to walk in a lawyer's office with all these warrants. I had all this weight on me, and I felt like I was at the end of all of it. And the guy I was seeing was in a tent, passed out on fentanyl, something I wouldn't touch, period. And all I could remember is this is the end. Like, this is it. This is where it's going to end. I got that phone call that day from the rehab, and they told me because of the extent of all my warrants that they couldn't accept me. And I was definitely hit my rock bottom. And I had tried to get high, and since I couldn't get high, I had so many raging thoughts running through my mind that I was like, all right, if this is how it's going to end, I may as well end it. I literally had all this explosive stuff in the middle of this field on this woman's property, a bunch of trash. And I was like, I'm going to blow myself up. And that's how I was going to go out, with a boom. And when I set fire to that on this woman's property, my face, before I could even move away, I didn't realize how big the boom was going to go and how fast it was going to go. And it went. And when it exploded, my face was down on that fire. And I kid you not, everything went around me. And it was so boom, it was a big boom, that the guy that was in the tent that I was seeing come running out like, "You're trying to kill me." And I was like, no. And I was in such shock about this that I looked down and I seen something shining. And everybody in the jail, they said, "Wait until you tell this in your testimony." I looked down, and it was an emblem, and I grabbed it. Everything had went around me in pieces, a hole in this ground. I should have been hurt. I should have been burnt, but I wasn't. And this gold emblem says, "God loves you." And I cried. And I didn't know what it was going to mean. And I cried. And I held that emblem. I carried that emblem. And I went and grabbed a sheet. And I grabbed this handmade angel doll that Mother Jen had made my daughter. And in the middle of a field, I didn't know what else to do. I got down on my knees. And I put that little doll in front of me, and I begged for mercy. Mercy. I didn't even know what I was doing at the time. But I knew I believed in God, and I knew that it had to have been Him watching over me right then. And I begged for mercy, and I didn't know what was to come next. I got caught a week later at my house in town. And it was only the beginning of something beautiful. In Jennings County Jail, though, I spiraled out because the first offer they offered me was 8 years. 8 years? Wow. That's bigger than anything I've done. And I'm like, 5 cases, 8 years. I'm like, ugh. And they had this work release program going on, and I was pushing off my court date. I was trying to tell my lawyer, I want this. I want work release. I've been to prison. I've did programs. Did this. I want something that's going to help me get structure, help me get stability. And I'm not going to sign something until I can do what everybody else is doing. They was giving other drug dealers, other people this, and I'm not even charged with drug dealing. I'm charged with drug possession. I need help. I want this. I want structure and stability in my life. So I kept pushing off court dates. But my demon was still roaring while I was locked up. And I had hit a girl in one hit, and it knocked her clear back, and it got me put on a 23-hour lockdown. And when I got put on that 23-hour lockdown, I realized that that's not who I wanted to be. I didn't want to hurt her. She didn't do this to me. I did this. I was lashing out because of my own hurt and my own anger. And then I started punching brick walls. Then brick walls got me out of my jail cell into a hospital. But every time I would use my right hand and I would punch that brick wall because I would get mad at myself for what I did and and where I was at. And I would go to the hospital. It was never shattered. It was never broke. In that 23-hour lockdown for almost 6 months, it was 90 days, and I got off on good behavior. I started getting in a Bible. I cried because I didn't know. Somebody told me how to look up a chapter and a verse, and I was like, what does that mean? Like, they would say Luke chapter 9, verse 13. I was like, and I cried because I literally didn't know how to look that up in a Bible. And when I cried, she was like, oh, you're serious? You don't know how to read a Bible like this? I'm like, no, I don't. I just sit on that top bunk and I pray every day, and I highlight what comes to me in that Bible as I'm reading the words in it. I just light it in blue because I feel like it speaks to me. And that's what I did in my 23-hour lockdown for that 90 days. I had a prayer bunk, and I was getting closer to God. And I had a cross above my cell, and I would high five it every day. And anytime I would start raging, I would give it to God. I'd jump up there and slap the cross and give it to God. Well, I had punched a wall a couple different times. When I finally got released off my lockdown, they opened my cell door, and I had found peace in my cell by myself with the Bible. I had my own prayer bunk. Everything was different. And the officers had come in there and told me that I needed to give my cell up for a lockdown. And I said, no, I don't think so. I'm not doing that. I'll volunteer to be on lockdown with them. And they was like, no, Josie, you're going to the day room out there with them other girls. And I was like, that's not happening. And I was like, you take me out of here, and I feel like something's going to happen. So before I had gotten off my prayer bunk, they said, I'll give you a minute to get out of your cell, or we're going to move you out. And before I gotten down, I would think it was Psalms 34. And it said the godly would not even shatter one hand in the bone, or a bone in their hand. And before you knew it, my friends were moving to me on my cell. And I knew something bad was going to come, and me moving into that day room. I had lashed out one more time, only on the cell block main door. And I didn't stop. Blood was slinging. And all I could think of was that Bible verse in my head when I was in the hospital this time. And the cops were like, it's shattered, it's gashing, it's all bruised. And I'm cuffed to a hospital bed, and the nurse came in and told me it wasn't shattered, it wasn't broke. And that officer called her a liar. And then that's when I had my come to Jesus moment. I looked up at God and I said, all right, I surrender. I knew from reading that Bible verse to that, yeah, it was it. The REC program came in to Jennings County Jail on my 33rd birthday, July 28th of 2023. Shauna Reese, who's here today. Before going in there, the ladies in the cell block kept telling me that it was, Josie, you're going to love this. You're going to love this program. You're going to love this. And I was like, what makes you think that? And they said, the way you've been in your Bible and talking to God and praying, you're going to love this. You're going to love the REC. So I had prayed before I went in there, because I told God if I didn't feel comfortable, and he knew that. If I didn't feel comfortable and I didn't feel, that I would back out of it. And before you knew it, and when I was walking in there, God had already prepared the way. He had used the women as vessels, and he used Shauna Reese to get to me. Because when I walked to that table and I had my name tag on, she called me by name, and I was like, do I know you? She said, it's been over 20 years ago. I met you in Camp Holland. From the very first rounds of my addiction, she knew who I was, with them cut off shorts, with them bare feet, and with where she knew exactly where I had come from at the earliest of my addictions. And all that weekend, that whole weekend, she is like, this is going to be amazing. And would tell me that. And she embraced me, and all of the women showed us God's love. All of it. But she held me all weekend. And I looked at her in a different light and in a different eye view. And I was like, if God did that with her, and she knew me from that early in my addiction, he can do that for me. And that's all I thought in my head. If he did that for her, he can do that for me. I got baptized on my 33rd birthday. And I have not looked back since. Today, I am an in-home caregiver at my home to a veteran who's 72 years old. She served for the military 50 years. I'm also I have a lead position right now at my job. Sometimes it's temporary, sometimes it's not. I have a relationship with my family. God is great, and He deserves every bit of this. Nothing else has ever worked for me. Not rehab, not jail, not going cold turkey, drying out, none of it. But the minute I handed my life over to the Lord, got baptized, and it washed every bit away, and I came up a new creation, and I knew it, and I believed it, and I've held on to it. It's got me to where I am today. And I thank God for that.